constantly discover new things and get rid of old bad theories, thanks to those unique, eccentric individuals who are willing to be the first one to put their hand up and say, I disagree. I believe something that nobody else does, and I think I can defend it, and I have the backbone to stand up and try.
I'm your huckleberry.
Hey everybody, I'm Ralph Calabrese. You're watching Dad Positive, and I need someone to nominate me for a Nobel Prize. If you're a professor, a former laureate, I don't think John Nash is alive anymore. Does anyone know if Goodwill Hunting has a Nobel Prize? Because maybe he could nominate me.
This is a fucking joke.
What? He's a fictional character? We got a deadline. The deadline is January 31st. This 2026, right around the corner. Deadline, January 31st. Somebody out there's got to nominate this guy for a Nobel Prize. What's this nomination going to be for? It's going to be for my theory of perceived authority. But first, let's listen to Professor Gad Saad talk about the kind of the criteria and the criteria set from a scientific understanding of human behavior phenomena. Let's listen to him.
The difference between proximate and ultimate explanations in science. For those of you who may not be familiar with those two terms, let me briefly summarize them for you. So proximate explanations is where much of science operates. It explains the how and what of a phenomenon. Most Nobel Prizes that have ever been won have been won at the proximate level. The ultimate explanation for a given phenomenon involving a biological organism is to understand the Darwinian why. So while the proximate causes tackle the how and what, the ultimate explanation seeks to understand why would the particular trait or behavior have evolved to be of that form. And so it's not that ultimate is a superior explanation to proximate, it's that you need both epistemological levels of a scientific explanation to fully understand a phenomenon.
That's a perfect segue for setting this up. I have a saying that I came up with on my own because I'm really stupid. Knowing is the what, understanding is the how, and realizing is the why. Getting back to that intro where Helen Andrews stated that the weirdos like me are the ones who are going to push knowledge forward, you have to kind of put your hand up and say, I disagree with what's going on. So unfortunately, I'm going to try and do that the most respectful way I can, because I don't think it's a failure of academia. It's just a lack of understanding in the present term. So the fact that he said most Nobel Prizes are in the proximate level, and what I'm going to present to you is at the ultimate level. So, referencing what Professor Saad said there about the approaching human behavior from a Darwinian perspective, that's the part I disagree on. And so another saying I have is, the way I define a critical thinker is one who has the ability to analyze a subject within a given context while simultaneously analyzing the context. One who has the ability to analyze a subject within a given context while simultaneously analyzing the context. Okay, so what do I mean by that? If you listen to his take on what it takes to win a Nobel Prize and understanding human behavior through the Darwinian perspective, that's the critical thinker. I'm a critical thinker. So I looked at human civilization, and pretty much 100% of academia kind of uses the approach of looking at human behavior through the lens of evolutionary theory. And so what I've noticed is they try to take present day civilization and then map evolutionary theory over it to determine why we do or what we do and how we do it. And maybe a why. I haven't heard a lot of that, but it's mostly the why would be reproduction and, passing on genes. But, and this is where I'm not going to say evolutionary theory is wrong. I'm going to say that we've approached it incorrectly. So if I'm looking at a given, to analyze a subject within a given context. That explains academia looking at human behavior as the subject, and the context is Darwinian theory. So the context is evolutionary theory. So what I did, because I'm a critical thinker, I looked at human behavior and then the context being through the lens of evolutionary theory, and then I analyzed the context. So applying evolutionary theory to human behavior, and then I realized, well, we have it backwards. We have it backwards because the constant is evolution and nature. Civilization constantly rises, falls, each area or region has completely different behaviors. So we can't use modern civilization as the baseline and then try to map evolutionary theory over it. What we have to do is look at the human mammal from an evolutionary standpoint, and then map how does civilization impact our evolution, if that makes sense. Well, it does make sense because that's kind of it has to be reversed. So what I discovered is, because we aren't living for survival anymore, so civilization, you map that over, and we've done away with the survival instinct aspect. So how has civilization impacted human behavior? Well, one, it's eliminated the survival aspect of our brains. And well, we have to replace that with something. So we don't have survival brains anymore. We have compensation brains. Okay. So our brains compensate for our emotional energy, our emotional patterns. We're mammals. There's only male and female. We can only compensate to either the masculine or the feminine. Bear with me here. This is laying the groundwork, and then we're going to listen to Helen Andrews kind of go into some detail about some stuff, and also touch on revolutions, and then we'll jump back to this. So my theory of perceived authority states that if you have a masculine perceived authority or a feminine perceived authority, because we're mammals, and it's going to lay out your behavior in certain patterns that you'll see that I can pretty much explain, or the theory can pretty much explain, and the patterns explain 90% of human behavior. So before we get into that, let's listen to the discussion on the failures of masculinity and femininity.
Don't you know the French Revolution? There were purges and the guillotine. It wasn't women up there cutting people's heads off. It was men. Wouldn't you rather have the feminine failure over the masculine failure? If the masculine failure is people bleeding out in the middle of the town square, and the feminine failure
It's just a bunch of gossip.
A bunch of gossip that makes
Much lower body count.
Right. You might not be killed, but you might be debanked. You might not be welcome in the marketplace. You might not have an easy time fitting in with your church community or your bowling league or whatever you might be up to. That is a terrible fate for anyone. It's inhuman to do that to somebody else, but it's not killing them.
That's true. Although one downside of that is that you have a lack of accountability, right? It's always the actions of the mob. You always, if you're being punished, you always want to have one authority that you can appeal to, as opposed to appealing to a diffuse group of faceless individuals. It is true that masculine modes of conduct and feminine ones each have their own failure modes, and that the masculine ones tend to have higher body counts. And I guess my position is that failure's bad either way, but that we need to tailor it to the purposes of an institution. Think about something like a university. What is a university for? It's for finding and transmitting the truth. And truth only marches on. We only discover new things and get rid of old bad theories thanks to those unique, eccentric individuals who are willing to be the first one to put their hand up and say, I disagree. I believe something that nobody else does, and I think I can defend it, and I have the backbone to stand up and try.
I'm your huckleberry.
Right, like those eccentric weirdos are what keep knowledge moving forward.
So they're talking about how because men commit most of these acts, that the failure is based in the masculine. I want to introduce, especially the fact that they talked about body count. Let's listen to Professor Steven Pinker talk about revolutions and kind of the whole body count topic.
The French Revolution was a disaster, killed 2 million people, led to the rise of Napoleon, perhaps the world's first totalitarian fascist dictator who began wars of conquest that killed an additional 4 million people, led to the restoration of slavery, to the restoration of the monarchy and a delay of democracy in France by perhaps a century. Russian Revolution killed several million, led to the Russian Civil War, which killed another 9 million, led to the rise of Stalin, who killed 20 million. There's an old cliche, you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. Well, it ignores the fact that people aren't eggs, and that generally does not result in an omelet. Again, the Chinese Revolution, perhaps the most disastrous event in history, led to the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, which killed perhaps 30 to 40 million people altogether.
Now we're looking at, I'm not good with math, but I kind of jotted down about 70 million. About 70 million deaths associated to revolutions, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution. If you just add those three, that's about 70 million, the body count. Okay. And yes, mostly men probably committed the physical acts. Now, if we're going to use revolutions as an example, let's throw in the American Revolution. And these are the stats that I found on the old AI interwebs. So essentially around 25,000 American deaths, maybe 24. We'll just round up and say the American Revolution has a body count of about 50,000 total. Okay, so they're all quote unquote revolutions. And why is the body count so low on the American Revolution versus the others? Again, a critical thinker. Let's throw that up again. One who has the ability to analyze a subject within a given context while simultaneously analyzing the context. Boom. Okay, so the context is a revolution. So academics say we're going to look at revolutions, and whatever they call a revolution is the context of how they're going to approach it. Well, let's analyze the context. There's something different. There's something different here about all of these other revolutions and the American Revolution. The American Revolution isn't really a revolution. A standard revolution, and the one that's all these disastrous ones, are based in, I'm going to put my chart up here in a minute, are based in what I call negative energy, meaning they only seek to take away. And the difference between the American Revolution, and I'm a blue collar guy, so I'm going to give a simple example. It would be if you take the modern, I got a Broncos t-shirt on, perfect. If you take the Ford factory and all of the employees start to, have a strike, I think they did that not too long ago, and they're want different demands and they're protesting and they're not going to work, and then they would decide they're going to overthrow the factory leader, and then everything falls apart because their only objective is to get rid of, take away, and identify things they don't like. It's all based in the negative. Now, the better way to describe the American Revolution would be if employees, the Dodge brothers started out with Henry Ford, and then they ended up leaving and going on their own and starting their own company. But let's say the Dodge brothers, while they worked for Ford way back in the day, say they moved to another area and started production and building their own, and all of a sudden the factory they built, even though they were with Ford, say they started building and doing things their own way and becoming more successful and more productive. And then and Ford stepped in and said, you can't do it. And they're like, wait a minute, these were our ideas. We might have started from here, but we built this ourselves. It's based in the positive. And the reason that they would maybe, in that instance, they would probably fight it out in court. Maybe they did. But the analogy there is the American Revolution is built on positive energy because it wasn't a desire to take away and overthrow. That's more of, factory workers wanting to strike and rebel against whoever's in charge now. But the reality is, a better comparison would be if employees at a factory went to another location, built something up that started to outperform, and then there was a conflict, but it was based on positive because it was about performance. And so the American Revolution is not a standard academic revolution. It's an independence. It's a fight for independence. It's not a revolution that's based on the negative psychology. What do I mean negative psychology? So this is where the whole body count thing is going to get turned upside down. Because we're mammals, because the theory of perceived authority states that we can only function based in masculine or feminine energy because those are the only two that exist, and we get imprinted on by each one. Let's look at this chart here. Okay, now we're gonna, again, I want to be nominated for a Nobel Prize by January 31st, right around the corner. I'm gonna be presenting stuff that's Nobel Prize worthy. So these are the two patterns of human behavior. I call them the two triangles, triangle of opportunity, triangle of oppression. They're based in a feminine or masculine perceived authority figure. If you have so if we look at the American Revolution as, and this is the other thing about the topic they discussed, it's not a failure of masculinity that it is a failure of masculinity that led to the French Revolution, Russian Revolution, and Chinese. It's the failure of masculinity is the success of the feminine energy. And so if you look at these charts, the success is based in the negative. So it's not just, because what did he say? What's the worst that can happen? You just get, gossip and, backbiting. And so it might start out that way. And if you look at Western civilization right now, we're on that path because when you're functioning in the feminine energy that's based in the triangle of oppression, everything is seen as a negative. And okay, so let's look at this chart and explain this real quick. The triangle of oppression is based in feminine energy. The triangle of opportunity is based in masculine energy. We're mammals. In nature, males are, this is where you apply evolutionary theory to how civilization has impacted that. In nature, male mammals compete. They have to compete to reproduce. They compete to hunt or to find food and to survive. So the positive emotion, the positive energy is a male mammal is designed for competition. Now, because we live in civilization, it's altered the daily requirement for that, but it didn't alter our DNA and our psychological makeup. So on the female side, female mammals, their number one thing with the way they interact is to reproduce and to nurse. And the offspring are dependent on the nursing mother up until it's time to be weaned. Okay, this is what explains essentially kind of the psychobiology of why this theory and these patterns play out. Because again, we have to map civilization over nature. So if civilization has made it to where offspring do not actually go through that weaning process and do not completely separate themselves psychologically from the nursing mother, then they still function as if they're an unweaned offspring and they're dependent. And now that's going to lay out in a whole pattern of behaviors. So essentially, when you have a feminine perceived authority figure, you function like an offspring that is still psychologically dependent on the nursing mother. When you have a masculine perceived authority figure, you function more in line with nature, and because you're more independent and have to compete. And that's the difference between these two patterns. The thing about the triangle of oppression is it doesn't exist in nature. It's a product of civilization, which is why we can't use evolutionary theory to understand behavior that functions on that side, in that realm. If you think about it, let's go down the list here. The difference between the triangle of oppression and the triangle of opportunity. You have liberal versus conservative. You have compassion versus competence, conformity versus competition, control versus power, acceptance, accomplishment, relationships oriented, results oriented, justice on the left, freedom on the right. They're people oriented on the left and performance oriented on the right. Nonprofit on the left, profit on the right. Love is more associated with the, feminine perceived authority figure types, and faith on the conservative, more positive, masculine types. And you got rights versus responsibility, feelings versus actions, collective. This is a big one right here. Collective versus the individual. We'll get into that when I do my economics one. Happiness versus meaning. The left is more digital or electronic oriented. The right is mechanical. Examples of careers, and I'm going to do another one on this. This breaks down in career choice also. Psychiatrists tend to be liberal. Surgeons are more conservative. Professors, liberal. Military, conservative. Teachers, liberal. Police, conservative. We know that. I actually have another chart that I'm going to go through. But then this is the identifies a lack of versus is a call to action. And then wants to take away, and then on the positive side, works to increase. So if you're trying to use evolutionary theory to understand what behavior on the left is, you can't say on it from an evolutionary standpoint, why would the left be so pro-abortion? Because that stops genes from being passed on. Why would they be so pro women shouldn't have kids? None of that applies to an evolutionary standpoint that is about survival and about reproduction. Go to Canada. They have a maid service, which is absolutely bazonkers, just bonkers and bizarre. Bazonkers. Bizarre and bonkers. It's bazonkers. I think I just created a new word. It's bazonkers that they have the maid service that you can just unalive yourself. That kind of goes against evolution, doesn't it? So the thing is, the triangle of oppression, the left, based on a feminine perceived authority, is the psychology of an offspring that is not yet weaned, and it sees everything else as standing in between it and the nursing mother. So that's why it's about negative and take away. It wants to eliminate. The only chance it has to, say, get the sustenance it needs is to eliminate the other nursing offspring around it. That's the closest thing you can map from nature to a feminine perceived authority figure. Now, again, on the right, why are we headed this way? Because in civilization, the more civilized we become, the less masculine we become, the more feminine takes over, which then leads to more negative energy offspring that function in the triangle of oppression. So back to these revolutions. The difference between what the French, Russian, and Chinese revolution is they were based in negative emotion. They were based in the triangle of oppression. And they look at, so the bourgeoisie was the perpetrators, the working class is the victims, and the comforters are going to be the revolutionaries. And that's the way that pattern works. That pattern works. It works for all things on the left. Whether you're an environmentalist, animal rights person, minorities, all the triangle of oppression identifies all of those patterns. So that's why the American Revolution shouldn't be classified as a revolution. And again, you have to step back and not just analyze the subject within the context, but analyze the context itself. It does not qualify as a standard revolution, it is based in positive energy. It was based in production. They built it. It was the freedom aspect was they wanted to be free to do more and accomplish more. So those, as you look at again, all of these of the chart, the the triangle of opportunity. I haven't explained that one. The critic is the person or thing that makes you have to think critical, come up with a solution, and then accomplish it because it's based in accomplishment. And then once you accomplish it, you're victorious. And then either you or everybody praises you. Good job. Think of the hero's journey. That's why that's on there. Sports teams. In this case, the revolution was we're wanting to, we got to think critical. Okay, these guys are taking our money. We're the ones doing the work. This isn't, but it's not the same. That framework, once I just said that, I guarantee somebody was like, that's the same thing with the Marxists. It's that I forget what they call it, the shareholder or stockholder. I don't know what that is. You don't have to get to that's the other thing. We overanalyze things. So we overanalyze the small details and don't step back and look at the context. And so a lot of academics and intellectuals overanalyze everything to this, minute little detail, and they miss the big picture because it's not the same. The people in the French Revolution wanting to overthrow the rich, that wasn't what the American Revolution was. They're like, we built this damn thing and we want to keep it and build more and do. And so it was, again, it's all about positive versus negative. And so when you add the body count, you can say that the American Revolution was based in a success of masculine energy. That was masculine. That was the masculine being victorious. And maybe that's the other thing. It was a revolution. Why weren't there millions of people that died afterwards? Why did it not follow the same pattern as the other revolutions? Because it was based in positive energy. It was based in the triangle of opportunity, which nobody knows about. But once you nominate me for a Nobel Prize by January 31st, then we can start talking about this. So that's why the American Revolution doesn't count. It was based in positive and an accomplishment and results. So the other revolutions were based in a success of the feminine. It wasn't a failure of the feminine. When the feminine gets its way, it takes away. So the American Revolution is a success of the masculine, and all of these other revolutions, the French, the Russian, the Chinese, they're a success of negative energy. They're a success of the feminine energy and taking away. And so again, but men are the one doing all the killing. We got to blame them. Okay, let's go back to what I said about mapping civilization over evolution. Males are designed to compete, but then when you have a feminine perceived authority, and the mind and the psychology of the offspring is, I'm dependent on the feminine. And when you're a nursing offspring, you do not turn against the nursing mother. You're dependent on her. So your psychology is you don't see yourself as an individual. You see yourself in the collective. Think of a litter of kittens. And this is where left brain thinking comes in. I got more on Ian McGilchrist. Left brain thinking, I think, is more the grab, get, short-sighted. Well, that's the way nursing offspring functions. And again, I'll do a video on that. But so you have these males that are living in a dominant feminine energy. They're functioning as if they're nursing offspring that's not weaned. So you don't attack the feminine. We don't have that in us. Look at civilization right now. Why is all this madness happening? And this is, people say, why aren't men standing up and doing anything? Because the psychobiology is when you're dependent on the nursing mother, you don't attack her. So I think that's enough to get to the intro to this. Okay. So the theory of perceived authority states that because we're mammals and there's only male and female, if we're imprinted on more from the masculine versus if we're imprinted more on the feminine, this is a phenomenon that only takes place in civilization. This is why, unfortunately, for all the evolutionary psychologists and biologists, you can't apply that aspect to the feminine perceived authority figure and any of those behavioral traits, those characteristics. They're not in line with nature. So again, instead of taking civilization here and mapping evolution over it, we have to say evolution is the main one. That's the baseline. That's where everything starts. Just think about it. If Western civilization crumbles, it's going to go back to a more natural standpoint. You're not going to have any of this stuff that's all on the left because you're going to have survival. You're going to be too busy trying to survive, not compensate. So in civilization, in Western civilization, we have compensation brains, not survival brains. We function either in masculine or feminine energy. It's getting harder and harder to function in the masculine because the feminine is taking over and negating and taking away. That's when you think about that's what all of the things on the left do. They take away. They identify things they don't like, and then they want to take them away. Why do revolutions always end in massive death and high body counts? Because the psychology is to take away. It's that simple. But if you're looking at things through a lens of evolution and survival, you're going to get lost and not be able to, determine the why. So when it comes to somebody nominating me for a Nobel Prize by January 31st, the why, or the ultimate versus the proximate, is the why is we don't have survival brains in Western civilization. We have compensation brains, and these patterns explain the why of, let's just say for this one, it's the failed masculine leads to the successful feminine, which leads to death and destruction. I mean, we kind of have plenty of examples throughout history of that. So if we want to avoid that, we need to acknowledge it. We need to realize, okay, our current level of analysis doesn't work. It's time to put that on pause and if you're an academic out there, be excited. But if you're, the thing about professors is they're liberal and on the left. So they're based in the negative. What happened to our universities? They became too liberal and leftist and started to want to take away the masculine. But if you are a grad student who has some of the positive tendencies, take this, look at this chart, think about the things I said, comment, reach out to me. If you know a professor, nominate me for a Nobel Prize by January 31st. Yes, based on the patterns of history, the West is going to crumble and fall. We have the ability now to start analyzing and identifying what we're doing in order to make changes. And it is fixable. It's not fixable under the current logic or thinking patterns, but when you look at it through what I'm presenting, it's fixable. We just have to start having the conversation, and then we can work together on it. Because once you add the positive, once you frame everything through the triangle of opportunity, and you can frame this in your thoughts. You can, throughout the day, you can know if you have a thought that whether it's negative or positive, and then just reframe it. And I know this is, I don't know, maybe I don't use the word fair, but maybe it's unfair to understand that all the political left, all the liberal, all the Marxist, communist, progressives, you feel such discontent and discomfort because you're not functioning in a natural pattern that exists in nature. And the thing is, when you get your way, everybody loses. And there is a way. I'm not going to use this video as my therapeutic session, but there is a way for you to look at these two patterns and shift, because the feminine victory leads to the end of, societies, not, and civilizations. And then you have to rebuild. And when you rebuild, you start with the masculine, and the process goes all over again. This could be the first time in recorded history that we don't allow a positive empire to fall, because what the West has accomplished is the most successful. And this is where, if you're the leftist type, you're immediately going to be like, no, but slavery, because you're negative and you only identify things you don't like and want to take away. So even doing that doesn't accomplish anything. The West is, in recorded history, the most positive era of civilization that we've ever had. I think the 90s were probably the best, but there's no reason, I don't think there's any reason, if we have this information, that we can't start doing something about it. Because right now, I'm completely aware of the what's going on subconsciously in the minds of the, kind of everybody. So yeah, let's have a conversation about it. If you're an academic, or if you're Will Hunting, son of a bitch, he's so smart. Nominate me. Questions, comments, come at me. Tell me what you got. If you got a podcast and want to talk about this, let's talk. It's not going away, and we've got to do something. And let's get started now. I don't know how to end these things. I don't like doing videos. Okay. Beep.